Good evening. Scientists on both sides of the Atlantic said today they'd completed a rough draft of the entire human genetic code. One said it amounted to an instruction manual for building a human being. It's seen as one of mankind's greatest scientific achievements, on a par with splitting the atom and inventing the wheel. The implications are profound. It could lead to the end of diseases like cancer and diabetes.
With all the fanfare of his office, Bill Clinton emerged today to herald one of the greatest scientific breakthroughs in human history. For the first time, we are on the threshold of understanding the makeup of life itself, and the implications are awesome.
It will revolutionize the diagnosis, prevention, and treatment of most, if not all, human diseases. In coming years, doctors increasingly will be able to cure diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, diabetes, and cancer. Dr. Fred
The president was linked by satellite to Downing Street, where the Prime Minister said mapping the human genome opened the way to a new era.
For let us be in no doubt about what we are witnessing today, a revolution in medical science whose implications far surpass even the discovery of antibiotics. The first great technological triumph of the 21st century.
And watching were some of the British scientists who pioneered this work when others said it was impossible. 1/3 of the human genome was mapped in the UK. Their contribution was immense. And the results of the Human Genome Project will be felt almost immediately. By 2003, we can expect new accurate tests for some cancers and hereditary diseases. By 2010, new drugs should start to appear that can target cancer cells, leaving healthy cells undamaged. And 50 years on, life expectancy, at least in the West, could rise to 95 years or even older. This is the nerve centre of Britain's effort, the Sanger Centre in Cambridge. And here they say this is just the start.
This is a set of instructions to make a human being. It's as simple as that. And we're going to spend the next decades and centuries of humankind working out what it all means, how it works, how it puts us together. But when we've done that, all that understanding, and it's really important we're at the beginning, not the end, when we've got all that understanding, we shall really understand life. And that's a pretty big statement.
But there are dangers as well as opportunities. In time, scientists will be able to predict whether an individual will suffer a particular disease, and that could encourage discrimination by insurance companies and employers, among others. And ultimately, it could lead to an even more frightening world where parents design their own children, not just their height and eye colour, but even their character and intelligence.
You can imagine a science fiction world of the future in which the well-to-do can genetically design their offspring and an underclass can't. We can all agree that we don't want that world. So as we go forward, learning more, taking steps towards such a science fiction future, we need to be sure, as Clinton and Blair reminded us, the scientific discovery is coupled with careful, wide public discussion about how we use it.
More immediately, the US Patent Office has to deal with 20,000 applications from companies wanting to claim bits of the new knowledge. The basic map itself is now in the public domain, but there are still concerns that the human genome should be freely available for mankind. The fact that this extraordinary scientific achievement was launched here in Downing Street and in the White House reflects the vast importance the authorities attach to it, not just because it will revolutionize medicine, but because in time it promises to change the lives of everyone living on the planet. But it also raises profound moral questions, the answers to which we still do not have. Neil Dixon, BBC News, Downing Street.
Today's announcement follows years of painstaking scientific work and intense arguments over the value of decoding the human genetic blueprint. Our science correspondent David Concar looks at the scale of the achievement and what it might mean for us all.
This is the real star of today's announcement, DNA. It's just a sticky blob, yet within its chemical structure lies the complete blueprint for making a human being. Nearly the whole of that blueprint, or genome, has now been mapped in vast production line laboratories like these. It's been a massive and costly project, but the genetic information it's produced will be transforming people's lives for centuries to come. In 1953, James Watson changed the world by helping to discover the now famous double helix structure of DNA. He thinks this is an even greater turning point for our species.
I think finding the sort of book of life has to rank with one of the great moments in human history. That we've evolved to the point where we can read our own book of instructions.
The full set of those instructions is found in nearly every cell in our bodies. They're written inside the double helix of each cell's DNA. Only by smashing the helix into millions of pieces were scientists able to read them. Each piece is built from combinations of just 4 different chemicals, and each chemical is a single letter in our genetic makeup. There are 3 billion in total, and nearly all of them have now been identified and placed in the right order, a task so big it could only be done by a supercomputer. Some critics say the project's been overhyped, but this family disagrees. Alexander is healthy, but his younger brother Christopher inherited the fatal genetic flaw that causes muscular dystrophy.
For a lot of people, it's just a string of letters, but for our family, it's our only hope for the future, for a cure for our son Christopher, and for any of the other boys out there suffering from this condition.
Scientists in Oxford are already scanning the code for clues as to how to treat the condition. It's painstaking and expensive work, bankrolled mainly by charities. But some benefits from the genome are already here. The genes on this slither of glass can be used to tell which cancer patients can be treated with drugs and which need surgery. Even to experts, the tumours look identical.
Virtually every cancer will be re-diagnosed in a way using these molecular methods. The textbooks of cancer diagnosis will essentially be rewritten.
And it's not just cancer. Thanks to the genome, diagnosing and treating even asthma is about to become a lot less hit and miss. Medicines that work well for some patients can be useless for others. But by analysing their DNA, scientists hope to develop new and better drugs tailored to suit each patient's genetic makeup.
The complete genetic recipe for human life is now in our hands, and these are just some of the machines that put it there. There's no doubt that we're at the beginning of a medical revolution. The big question now is how we use all this genetic information, and just as importantly, how we stop it being misused. David Conkar, BBC News, at the Sanger Centre in Cambridge.
The IRA has opened its arms dumps to international inspectors for the first time. The inspectors, the former president of Finland, Martti Ahtisaari, and the former African National Congress General Secretary Cyril Ramaphosa, said they'd seen many guns and a large amount of explosives. All were secure, they said, and couldn't be used without their knowledge.
The 2 weapons inspectors are men of genuine international stature, and they came to report to the government that they'd done what they signed up to do, to examine IRA bunkers. The IRA had to do this. They said they would back in May. Nonetheless, physical force Republicans have taken a step none of their forebears ever did, a point not lost on the government.
It's a very important contribution to the peace process in itself, because all the time we're battling to keep people's confidence up. And I think that what we have now is politics working in Northern Ireland. We do have an inclusive government in which all shades of opinion are represented, but we're also seeing the shadow of the gunman fading at long last in Northern Ireland.
The hoard of weapons seized over the years by the security forces underlines the kind of arsenals held by paramilitaries, both Republican and loyalist. No one knows where or when the international inspectors saw the IRA bunkers, or why they're so confident that the weapons and explosives they saw can't be used without them knowing. The 2 men said in their statement that the dumps they saw held a substantial amount of military equipment, which had been safely and adequately stored. They said they were satisfied with the cooperation extended by the IRA, and that they planned to re-inspect the dumps on a regular basis to ensure the weapons remained secure. Sinn Féin said the IRA had acted imaginatively and with courage, and had taken a step without precedent in the 2-century history of modern republicanism.
And in that 200 years, there has not been an initiative like this by any of the armed lineage of resistance in all of that time.
The main unionist party opposed to the Good Friday Agreement is deeply sceptical about this whole arrangement.
There's nothing of substance here. It's just a bit of window dressing. It's an attempt by the IRA to give the pretense that they are doing something.
The pro-agreement unionists in the power-sharing government are content for now, but they want to see actual decommissioning eventually. The issue won't be the problem it has been for a time, but it's bound to resurface. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Belfast.
The first results in Zimbabwe's most crucial election for 20 years have been declared, and the early indications don't bode well for President Mugabe. His ZANU-PF party have just taken 5 of the 13 seats declared so far. 8 seats have been won by the opposition party, the Movement for Democratic Change. Earlier, election officials apologised for the delay in counting the votes, saying they'd been overwhelmed by the turnout. From Zimbabwe's capital, Harare, our World Affairs editor John Simpson reports.
This election has been characterised by so much suspicion and lack of goodwill that the sealed ballot boxes were guarded carefully throughout the night and checked vigilantly by party workers from all sides in case of tampering. And eventually, the boxes which contained the future of this country were opened for the counting process. And then came the first real problem.
They haven't started counting. But that is the position. The turnout is just too large. Overwhelming.
But in spite of the derision of the press, the opposition accepted that the delay had indeed been caused by the large size of the vote. The turnout was around 65%, easily the highest in the history of a country where, until now, elections have always been a foregone conclusion. The police appealed for calm, and roadblocks briefly appeared on the streets. But soon the results started coming in, and they were exactly what the opposition had been expecting.
14,701 votes.
Back at the results centre, the first 3 were from the Bulawayo area, where the government's been unpopular ever since the massacres its troops carried out in the 1980s. Here, the opposition had won overwhelmingly. Since then, a rather different pattern's been establishing itself. Although the MDC, the main opposition party, is ahead in terms of the seats so far declared, the differences between the two main parties are often only a matter of a few thousand, sometimes even a few hundred votes. In one case, a leading government supporter, much hated by the opposition, just squeaked in by a very small majority. It looks as though there are going to be plenty of close calls as the counting goes on. John Simpson, BBC News, Harare.
And John Simpson joins me now live from Harare. John, what's the latest from the count? Is that pattern you were talking about continuing?
It is, Mike, yes. We've had 31 constituencies declaring now, and 18 of those are going to MDC, the biggest of the opposition parties, and 13 to ZANU-PF, the government party. So it's pretty much level pegging, with the MDC still doing distinctly better. The thing is that they've got to do very much better to form another government. But according to the Zimbabwe constitution, which is carefully loaded in favour of the government, the opposition would have to get 76 seats altogether to form a government, whereas ZANU-PF has only got to get 46 seats to carry on in power.
It's acknowledged all round there was a lot of intimidation during the election process. How fair do you think it's been in the end?
Well, I think the voting itself was pretty fair from what I could see, and the counting, as far as we can tell, there have been some glitches, but I think that's been pretty fair too. But as you say, it's the intimidation that really counts. It's the fact that people were scared to turn out. Only in the last few days before polling day did they kind of find the courage to walk out and to start speaking out and to say that they would actually support the opposition. So that was still there, and the fear of what might happen after the election, and that's bound to have an effect on it, of course.
If the opposition do win, as they're predicting at least, will Mugabe go quietly?
Well, already his people have been saying today, contrary to yesterday when they were saying, doesn't matter what the result is, we're still in. They've been saying today, well, of course, we would have to take account of the election, we'd have to take the account of the fact that the opposition had done well, if they do well, and would have to bring them into government in some way. So I think President Mugabe is starting to be aware of that. There are plenty of people who are very thoughtful and careful within ZANU-PF. It's not always how it's presented in the outside world. And I think they realise that it could be serious trouble if they just ignore what's happened here.
John, thanks very much indeed. Here, the drive to stamp out corruption in cricket is to be led by the former head of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Paul Condon. His appointment was announced by the International Cricket Council at Lord's this evening. He said he'd set up his own independent anti-corruption unit.
In cricket's holy of holies, the long room at Lord's, they've been forced to confront its deadliest sins, corruption and match fixing. And for once, fudge was off the menu, the ICC acknowledging with its appointment of the most senior of ex-policemen that the game's problems are too widespread and too dangerous to be ignored any longer.
Well, I wouldn't have taken on this job, if you like, just if it was just cosmetic or PR. I've not spent my life doing that sort of activity. I think it's a real challenge here for world cricket. I think I can bring something to that. And I'm confident in 3 years' time I and my team will have made a real difference.
His task will be daunting and global, taking in the ongoing revelations from South Africa's investigation into the Hansi Cronje affair, the allegations that several Pakistan players have been involved in match fixing at last year's World Cup and elsewhere, plus unsubstantiated accusations about the umpiring performance of Javed Akhtar in the final decisive test between England and South Africa 2 years ago.
He's known as an extraordinarily powerful force in the drive against police corruption in his days with the police force, and I am sure that he is yet another large and important cog in the machinery of the ICC for us to stamp out corruption of cricket.
How far back investigations can go is open to doubt. Arguably more important is making sure that corruption should never have a blind eye turned to it again. Before agreeing to take the job, Sir Paul Condon insisted that nothing and nobody be above his investigation. It's a measure of how seriously the ICC takes the whole issue of match fixing, that it's prepared to have its own cupboard searched for skeletons. Kevin Geary, BBC News, Lord's.
The man charged with the murder of the television presenter Jill Dando has appeared in court again today. Barry George, also known as Barry Bulsara, appeared before Bow Street magistrates in London. He was remanded in custody until July the 25th, when it's expected a date will be set for his trial. Police in Kent say they've identified nearly half of the 58 Chinese illegal immigrants found dead in the back of a lorry in Dover 8 days ago. They say they won't name the victims until all the bodies have been identified and the families contacted. Signal workers belonging to the rail union, the RMT, have voted narrowly in favour of industrial action against Railtrack in a dispute about pay. But the union has decided not to press ahead with an expected series of one-day strikes, which would have badly affected rail services. The market value of one of the biggest internet retailers, Amazon, has now gone down by 2/3 since last year, and it's all raising fresh fears about the true worth of some of the new high-tech companies. Even though Amazon has sold millions of books, CDs and videos, it lost £250 million last year. The slide in its shares was caused by a report suggesting it would run out of money before it started to make a profit.
It was here that the damage was done, as word spread through New York dealing rooms on Friday that influential analysts had turned against one of the internet's brightest stars. Its shares tumbled by 1/5. Amazon.com has proved you can sell books by the million on the net, but building a global business from nothing in just 5 years has cost a fortune. Today, Amazon shares were still shaky as investors digested reports that the company could run out of money. Simon Murdoch, who ran Amazon's UK branch before setting up an internet investment fund, believes the panic has been overdone.
When you order a book or a CD from the company, it comes very quickly, and people tell their friends about that. And that unique sort of brand strength of Amazon means that it's very well placed in the long term to be a successful business.
But it's the mismatch between sales and profits which now worries investors. In just 2 years, Amazon's revenue soared more than tenfold to $1.6 billion. But at the same time, losses grew from $31 million to $390 million. As Amazon prepares to meet record orders for the new Harry Potter book, online shopping clearly hasn't lost its magic. It's just that investors have stopped believing.
The consumer's already made a decision that they are going to shop online. You can see that in the success of travel sites, and you can see that in the success of books being sold and shares being traded. The real issue is that some of the dot-com businesses aren't making a profit as quickly as the market expected.
Investors in Britain's best-known internet firm, FreeServe, are also running scared. Shares in the loss-making business fell sharply today after a planned sale to a German firm fell through. Both internet use and online shopping are still growing rapidly, but the net may provide a better deal for the customers than for the companies involved. So shareholders are beginning to ask whether the money will run out long before the profits arrive. Rory Catlin-Jones, BBC News.
The chairman of the British Medical Association, Dr. Ian Bogle, has said he expects more scandals involving doctors. He told the BMA's annual conference in London that doctors were not getting worse, but detection of poor performance was improving.
Doctors arrived for their annual conference feeling battered and bruised under attack by the government and the media. Even patients, or at least a small group of campaigners, were there to complain about the medical profession.
People have been negligently treated, and when they complain, they're dumped by their doctor or hospital and they can't get treatment anymore. So we all have our own angle on it, but it all comes down to accountability, lack of professionalism and cover-up.
Incompetent doctors like disgraced surgeon Rodney Ledward and the Bristol scandal over heart surgery have embarrassed the medical profession and led to calls for tougher regulation. Opening today's conference, the BMA's chairman predicted more scandals would be uncovered, but warned against overreacting.
To punish the many for the acts of the few would be an act of folly. No one defends poor practice, but to seize on exceptional cases and present them as representative of the profession as a whole doesn't just damage doctors' morale, it eats away at patient confidence.
Among doctors, there's little doubt the climate of criticism has already damaged their profession.
I've been in practice for 30 years, and I've never seen the morale of my colleagues so low as it is now.
I think it's unfair the way that the profession is being hammered for the individual's errors.
Later this week, doctors are expected to condemn their own system of regulation with a vote of no confidence in a General Medical Council. It's a sign of how willing the profession is to reform in its attempts to regain public confidence. James Westhead, BBC News, at the BMA Annual Conference.
Since we've been on the air, Greg Rosetsky has crashed out of Wimbledon on the tournament's first day. He was taken to 5 sets by the American Vince Spadea in a dramatic match which lasted just under 4 hours. The two top seeds, Pete Sampras and Martina Hingis, went through comfortably.
Greg Rosetsky got the annual roller coaster ride for British tennis fans off to the most dramatic of starts. An operation on his foot seems to have shorn his serve of some of its power, and it was not the Rosetsky of old who tamely surrendered the first set. Rosetsky improved to take the second set against America's Vince Spadea, an opponent who's lost his last 16 matches. But then Rosetsky had to save 2 match points in the 4th set to stay in the championships. But in the end, there was no escape for Rosetsky. He'd never been at his best, and in the gathering gloom, he went down 9-7 in the 5th set. Pete Sampras, 6 times Wimbledon champion, swept aside Jiri Vanek of the Czech Republic as he hones in on an all-time record of 13 Grand Slam titles. And the #1 women's seed, Martina Hingis, made sure there was no repeat of last year's first-round exit with a comfortable 6-1, 6-2 victory over Ángeles Montolio of Spain. Anna Kournikova has courted controversy with her modelling assignments, but against the 10th seed, Sandrine Testud, she had to prove that she's rather good at her day job as well. Kournikova took the first set, but in some of the highest quality tennis of day one, Testud fought back to win the second. The deciding set went to Kournikova. Testud was the first seed to go out of Wimbledon, and Anna Kournikova answered the critics, who said she got more attention than her world ranking deserved. All the typical elements of Wimbledon have been crammed into the opening day. Glamour, excitement, an interruption for rain, and a cruel British disappointment. Tim Henman will try to raise British hopes tomorrow when he makes his first appearance here. Neil Bennett, BBC News at Wimbledon.
At the main news again tonight, scientists say they've finally unravelled the genetic blueprint of mankind. The biggest medical breakthrough for a generation could cure dozens of diseases. And the first election results in Zimbabwe's most important election for 20 years have been declared. They show President Mugabe's ZANU-PF party trailing behind the opposition. The next news is at 10 o'clock on BBC News 24. But that's all from the 9 o'clock news this evening. Good night.
For more on the unravelling of the human genetic code, visit BBC online at bbc.co.uk/news.
Good evening. Violent criminals and sex offenders could soon face tougher controls after they leave prison. The Scottish Executive is considering a raft of measures, including lifelong surveillance and restrictions on where offenders can go and who they can meet. The proposals from the Maclean Committee are in response to high-profile cases such as those involving John Cronin and Noel Ruddle.
On the left, John Cronin, a convicted sex offender who refused treatment in jail and committed further offences once released. His case was one of those which prompted the government to establish the committee which reported today. The Maclean Committee makes three main recommendations. The Executive should establish a risk management authority to study cases where offenders could strike again. It suggests convicted offenders should more easily be given hospital treatment if they have mental illness. And it proposes a new sentence, an order for lifelong restriction with tough conditions placed on those leaving prison. These are based on the Sexually Violent Predator Program in Phoenix, Arizona. Offenders are subjected to constant satellite surveillance with movements monitored in a control room. There are exclusion zones where they can't go, for example, close to a school. And there are restrictions on who they can meet.
We think for this particular group of offenders, and as an alternative to their remaining in custody so that they are able to live in the community, albeit with these very stringent conditions, we think it is acceptable and reasonable.
The report is being studied by the Executive and will form the basis of new legislation once it's been sent out for consultation.
A government-commissioned study has suggested that a fox hunting ban would have a minuscule impact on Scotland's countryside. It predicts that around 1 in 2,000 rural jobs would be lost. The Scottish Parliament will vote on the issue in the spring at the end of the hunting season.
If traditional fox hunting is scrapped, a study for the Scottish Executive concludes 30 full-time jobs would go and hundreds of part-time or seasonal posts. But its author says the overall impact on the rural economy would be extremely small.
So we're talking about an impact of 300 or so jobs in 500,000. So it's rather less, but near 1 in 2,000.
But hunt supporters insist the proposed ban would be devastating. They say they'll continue to fight to maintain this tradition and protect rural rights.
The Justice Minister's denied claims that Scotland's dragging its heels in implementing anti-racist measures. Several MSPs on the Equal Opportunities Committee said a steering group set up in the wake of the inquiry into the murder of Stephen Lawrence had done nothing. But Jim Wallace countered that anti-racism strategies have been devised for the police, and he added that this is not the type of work that can be rushed. That's it from us for now. Newsnight Scotland is on BBC 2 at 11. Good night.
Good evening. Well, the balls weren't the only thing that were bouncing at Wimbledon today. We had some raindrops bouncing off the covers, in fact, across the whole of South East England. The only place that had a significant shower, well, wouldn't you know it was Wimbledon. Things are looking much better, though, for the next few days. I think we could end up with some sunny mornings, some cloudier afternoons, but then the cloud melting away for the evening play through tomorrow and also on Wednesday. But later on in the week, it looks as though things will be cooling down as some more unsettled weather moves in right the way across the United Kingdom. It's going to be quite chilly tonight up in the far north, temperatures dropping away to around about 6 Celsius. There'll also be some drizzly rain across the Outer Hebrides, but for the rest of us, a dry night, and where the skies are clear, perhaps a little bit of dawn mist, but that's not going to hang around tomorrow morning. The sun will make short shrift of that. We will find some thicker cloud taking some of that drizzly rain across the north of Scotland tomorrow, but for many of us it'll be a dry day, quite a sunny day, the sunshine eventually getting up into Northern Ireland and southern parts of Scotland, quite a bit of sunshine across England and Wales, and it is going to be quite strong sunshine across southern Britain, the sun index up at around about 5 or 6. That means top temperatures will come out at around about 22 or 23 Celsius. So things are going to warm up, but then they're going to cool down as we go into the latter part of the week and into the weekend. And you can see those cooler colours moving in there. The reason for that, well, the high pressure that's with us at the moment will gradually let these weather fronts push in. Now we'll start to see that happening during Wednesday. A little bit of showery rain turning up in the far southwest and the far northeast. For the rest of us, still some warm sunny weather around. But by the time we get into Thursday, well, by then I think there'll be a lot of cloud right the way across the British Isles, and we can have showery bursts of rain breaking out just about anywhere, and some of that rain could turn out to be quite heavy. That's the forecast. That's all from me this evening. I wish you a good night.
DC Tom McCabe, DC Jim Cassidy.
You know, if something like that was to happen, yeah, could I have your car?
The new series of Badger, coming in July to BBC One.